Welcome to the Citizens Report, formerly the CEC Report. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
I should add it's the 1st of November and that means, Craig, we've got 2 weeks to go to get submissions into the cash ban. We're going to talk about that quite a bit. But also people would have noticed that I've said we've called this the Citizens Report. This will be the new name of the show going forward, but we are in transition. So just, we'll update all the labelling, etc.
Yeah,
in due
I'm the
course.
leader of the Citizens Party now, Robbie, not the CEC.
That's true. It's founder and leader of the Citizens Party, Craig Isherwood. All right. First, this is the economic fight of our lives. Second, how safe are Australia's banks? Bob Katter's bill will find out. So, first, this is the economic fight of our lives. What we're going to discuss today, we'll get into very specifics, but we want to provide a context first. And the context is this. Here's the question for the audience to ask themselves. What sort of financial system do we need? Do we need one that serves the people and the real economy? Or do we need one that feeds off people and serves only an elite few? And which one do we have now?
Well, the latter, Robbie, but it's a pretty obvious question, but it's not actually a very easy one for most people to understand, because for the last 40 years, people have only known economic rationalism, privatisation, which is the wholesale sell-off of assets, and there's a whole generation of economists who have no idea that there's actually a solution to this.
Now, that's true. What we have, though, now is a window of opportunity, because the current system, the one that feeds off people, is breaking down. And it's breaking down all over the world. And I'll get into some specifics, but also I just want to point out the things that we won't cover is just look at the uproar, the protests that are breaking out literally all over the world, in Lebanon, in Chile, in Ecuador, right, in France, even in Hong Kong. We've said something. One of the things I will say about the Hong Kong protests is Hong Kong is the one area of China where the standard of living hasn't materially improved, right? Because they're just one sort of economy which is basically dominated by financial services in a bubble, right? And it's that kind of pain and economic stress that drives the kind of anger that drives people to the streets. I mean, this is a phenomenon around the world because the system is breaking down. We are in the economic fight of our lives to change it. Here's the other things you should know that's just happened now, though, because what we're looking at, Craig, means a new financial crisis, as we've been warning for a long time, could erupt any time. The latest is the United States Federal Reserve has just lowered interest rates, right? Now, this is the central bank that was proudly changing QE and getting out of that and trying to unwind all that, and we're going to start normalising interest rates, etc. They pushed it a bit, and the reaction is so extreme that they're quickly unravelling, right? Mm-hmm. So they've lowered interest rates again. They're saying this is probably the last one for the year, who knows. Most importantly, when Jerome Powell, the head of the Fed, said this yesterday, he announced that the Fed will also extend this overnight repo injections, where they're putting $120 billion a night into the overnight lending market. They're going to extend that to daytime as well. They're calling it daylight overdrafts, right? The US Fed has the New York banks on a permanent drip of liquidity, such as the crisis that they're in. Here's some other facts about the big Wall Street banks. They've stopped lending to hedge funds, which is really significant because the hedge funds do a lot of the highly profitable gambling that pads the bank's books, right? They've not only have they stopped lending to them, $77 billion has been withdrawn from US hedge funds this year, $30 billion just in the last quarter, right? So there's a serious issue going on there. We just received word, Craig, that the big banks on Wall Street everyone is probably familiar how the US corporations and banks have been buying back their own shares. The big banks on Wall Street have been using their depositors' funds to buy back their shares.
In other words, they're propping their share price up, which is artificial.
Yep.
I mean, it creates a demand for the shares, which is artificial. I mean, it's incredible.
And on the Glass-Steagall principle, this shouldn't be allowed.
No way.
You do not use depositors' funds for this. So the depositors' funds are only for normal banking. JP Morgan for instance, has purchased back $70 billion of its own stock in the recent period, more than $70 billion.
That's not from their profits, Robbie. That's from the depositors' funds.
From the depositors.
It's one thing to buy back shares if you're actually making a profit, because that's, a lot of companies do that. But from depositors' funds,
and of course, like Australia, the Wall Street banks, the big 5 or 6, almost all America's deposits are concentrated in them.
Yeah.
Right. And so the risks are very concentrated. In Australian news, Craig, the monthly figure for credit growth to housing, right, has again fallen to an all-time low in September, right? It's now at 3.1%. A few months ago, this was over 4%. Up until the 2008 crash, it got to 12%. When they've been able to revive the bubble twice since then, it got over 8% each time. This is in this year that they've been trying to hype up the bubble again, right? And they're claiming house prices are rising, but John Adams and Martin North did a very important show questioning the data on house prices rising because it is fake data, right? They're trying to hype people into the market, hoping they can lure them in. Josh Frydenberg wants a 10% rise in property prices, but if banks do not grow their lending to housing, it can't happen. Right?
Yeah, Robbie, as John Adams has made the point in some of the tours and lectures he's been given, there's a huge number of people involved in the construction industry. 300,000 people could lose their jobs in the immediate period from a downturn in the construction industry. That would set off a tsunami effect in terms of the overall economy. And that's why they're desperate to try and get people to buy new homes, to sell new real estate, to make sure that housing market stays propped up.
Well, we need, so there's some predicates just to give you the latest state of the system. We need policies to clean up the mess, not to band-aid over things and kick the can down the road, actually clean up the mess and make the system work properly so that it serves people in the real economy, like I said. So let's just go through what we propose, Craig, briefly, and then, because I wanted to provide this as context for a real final push on the cash ban. First, Glass-Steagall. What does it do?
Well, it breaks up the banks, Robbie. It separates out the necessary banking that we have, which is boring banking, giving loans to people, taking in deposits that are secured, mortgages and that sort of thing. Very boring. No insurance companies, no financial advice, no nothing. So you separate that out from all the, investment banking, merchant banking, all the other things that have been poked in.
Speculation away from the real economy. Yeah. The audit of the banks, we'll deal with that more later, but just in general, what
it means you shift away from the big 4 accounting firms that have got vested interest in protecting the banks, and you actually shine a very strong spotlight on what is the liquidity situation of our banks. Are they profitable? They can't. It's a bit like the cockroaches running under the, run under the fridge. Well, we're going to take the fridge away.
Very good.
Expose the cockroaches.
Very good. Take the fridge away. A foreclosure moratorium, which I would add should be applied to the farmers in drought now too.
Well, Robbie, this is not new legislation, because they've had moratorium of certain types in Australian history. Various states have had them, particularly during the Depression, to keep people in their farms, in rental properties and so forth. Now, our legislation, which we've written on this, deals with a very important point, that in the event of a property downturn, a housing crisis, we can't have millions and millions of people or families out on the street. We can't lose our farmers. We've got to protect them, and you can't lose our manufacturing sector, particularly the small businesses. So what we propose is that we'll have a mechanism in law which, if a treasurer declares a financial or a natural crisis, at that point this legislation kicks in and there can be no more foreclosures.
Yep.
And then there's a committee put together, an expert committee, then has to decide a couple of things, right? If you've got a crash in housing prices, that affects the liquidity of the banks because the banks have got their assets tied up. But see, the unique thing about what we're looking at, Robbie, as apart from the other legislation in history, is that you've never had a property bubble the size that we've had that we have to deal with. So we've got some interesting mechanisms that the government of the day is going to have to work out in terms of rewriting mortgages, re-evaluating property prices and so forth, and we can't anticipate everything that might happen, but we know you can predict some of the things. And everything we're talking about is we're pre-planning this, right? Yes.
You do not wait for a crisis to then think, oh, we didn't know this was going to happen. What are we going to do? So, Craig, finally, the big one, our big policy, National Bank.
Well, Robbie, I think I want to refer to this manual that we've got. People can, it's available if people call in for it. But it goes through our new legislation for a national bank. Now, we've written legislation back in 1984 for a national bank, which basically controls the private banking system. It goes back to the ideas of Ben Chifley in the 50s, whereby the Commonwealth Bank, for example, controlled and looked at and regulated during the war particularly the private banking, so the credit went into the right places. Now, unfortunately, the Commonwealth Bank was sold off, it was privatised, so we've had to rewrite the legislation, which we've completed, and we've established a new Commonwealth National Credit Bank with the powers to literally control the interests of the people through their representative government, and to move away from this international control that we have through the Bank of International Settlements and the various controls from the central banking system.
So this becomes the regulator for the banks, but what does it also do?
It provides credit directly into the productive economy. It supports local councils, scientific and educational development. It supports large-scale infrastructure projects. In other words, look, when we talk about creating credit, we're not talking about quantitative easing, printing money. What we're talking about is actually making ideas come true. Like if we want to have a high-speed train network in this country, a Commonwealth Bank would create the credit. So at the end of the day, it provides the credit so people can be employed, that the materials can be bought, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, you've got an asset. You haven't got a debt. You've actually built something. So the credit is incredibly valuable in order to build the future. And that's what's not understood about this nature. And people call it, oh, you're printing credit, you're funny money and that sort of. No, it's not. This is a principle that built on Alexander Hamilton.
We've taken our policy takes the historical precedents that have worked.
Yeah.
Right, and it was the Commonwealth Bank in Australia, especially in World War II, and it was Alexander Hamilton's first bank of the United States.
And this is all based on historical precedents, and as I said, it's all available in this manual that people can call in and get a copy of.
Because essentially the private, even a well-functioning private financial system, which is supposed, would naturally operate with a profit motive, that's what it does. There are some things in an economy, especially for a nation, and when you think about nation building, that's so long-term, right, that's so visionary, you don't expect the private sector to do that, right? We wouldn't have the Snowy Mountain scheme if it was left up to the private sector, for instance, right?
No, that's right.
If you want that, you need here's the power that banks have. The government should be able to have that same power and a directing influence over it to say, let's make it work for this. And then you can have an economy that's going forward. So in that context, stopping the cash ban is one part of this fight, this economic fight for our lives. But it's a very important part because...
Yeah, Robbie, just to explain in case new viewers have come in, the government has passed legislation in the lower house to stop people using cash over the amount of $10,000, right? In other words, you've got legal tender in this country and the government's saying you can't use it above $10,000. Now, they intend to drop that limit because,
they're already being lobbied to.
Yeah, down to $2,000. And there's precedence about this
and more if they get away with it.
In Europe, and it's so-called the idea is to stop the black economy.
Yeah.
Well, we know from our research that where there is cash bans in place, the black economy is far, far worse.
No, exactly. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about what you need to do to fight this in the next 2 weeks. Welcome back to the CEC report, where we're discussing this is the economic fight of our lives. And we're now at the cash ban, which, as we said before the break, is one part of the battle, but it's an important battle in the war because of, if we can stop it, we're stopping the government from doing the things that are designed to keep propping up a broken system, and we can force them to start changing the system. So there's 2 weeks, as of today, 1st of November, there's 2 weeks left to make submissions to the Senate inquiry on this bill that the government's just passed through the House of Representatives. And it's very important, everybody watching this, if you haven't made it your submission, you must, and you're opposed, if you support the bill, then don't make a submission. But I suspect you won't. Do not finish this video and not make a submission. What we're going to go through now is some tips on what you can say, because we get a lot, people say, what should we say? First of all,
I was going to say, Robbie, before you go into this, we've got a website, stopthecashban.com. People can...
We're about to promote it on the ad.
Oh, good.
Watch this ad we're running on Channel 31 here in Melbourne. I'm Robert Barwick from the CEC Report and Citizens Party. We're fighting to stop the Morrison government's plan to ban cash. To fight for your freedom, visit this website and sign the petition. Banning cash has nothing to do with the black market. It's about trapping us in banks so we can't escape bad policies like negative interest rates or bail in. And they'll know everything we do. The ban starts at transactions over $10,000, but they're already talking $2,000. Fight for your privacy and freedom. Sign the petition and call in for more information.
Spoken and authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Electoral Council, Melbourne.
All right, so there you go. There's the ad. The website was on that ad, right? Stopthecashban.com.au. Now, here's how you make a submission. Everyone must make a submission. First, we'll put up this email. You send your submission to economics.sen@aph.gov.au. Right? Don't worry about doing the upload thing. Just send an email. You address it to Senate Standing Committee on Economics, PO Box 6100, Parliament House, Canberra, ACT 2600. Right, so you just address it to that and then go dear to or to whom it may concern, right? And then write what you want to write, but here's the subjects you should touch on, right? Because it's about the provisions in the bill. Civil liberties is an important one, right? Cash is legal tender, as Craig said before the break. You have a right to privacy. You have a right to not use a bank if you wish. And this takes that away. Plus, you don't want the government and the banks to be able to monitor and measure, the word of the guy who recommended this cash ban, monitor and measure everything you do financially. Why should they have the right to do that, right? So civil liberties is something you should write about if you're concerned about it. I suspect we all are. Second, the practical benefits of using cash. Power supplies and communications technology is not always reliable. And we've seen that just in the last couple of weeks. Multiple instances, Commonwealth Bank first, and then this week 3 banks all went down and people weren't able to use their payment systems, right? They're not always reliable. So that's ridiculous to be able to start pushing people away from that. Instant settlement for cash can also be better for commerce. You know that you've got your payment, right, straight away. And including large amounts of cash. Who are they to say, oh, people don't use large amounts of cash? Some people do. So make that point, especially if that's something that affects you. It's good for a discount. One of my friends, Genevieve Carrier, put on Twitter this week, I'll put the tweet up, she spoke to a local petrol station owner, an independent one, who was upset because his suppliers are saying he can only pay them electronically, and he told Genevieve he's been forced more and more into the banks, and his bank charges have gone through the roof in the last 10 years, right? And people don't like that. They want to be able to avoid it if they can, and this is going to start making it harder and illegal for them to do that. The other thing to address, the excuses for the law are false, also as Craig said before the break. Eliminating the black economy is one of the excuses. It's a lie and it won't work. As the ad said, our black economy is already small and shrinking, and cash restrictions have not reduced the black economies of European countries. They've made them worse, right? So that's ridiculous. A second excuse, restricting cash won't stop tax evasion because the majority of tax evasion is not done by individuals. It's done by big corporations and big banks using the big 4 accounting firms. It's a big scam around the world. As Andrew Wilkie said in that speech last week in Parliament that we played on the show last week, the government has all the laws it needs to crack down on those things. It doesn't use them. Ignoring the big guys and coming after us is a travesty of justice. And then finally, 2 things to make the point. The real reason is to trap Australians in banks. The IMF has said it in black and white. Negative interest rates, which all central banks are going to, will not work unless people cannot leave the banks. If they can use cash, they will leave the banks. Bail-in is the same thing. People will get wind of bail-in, they'll pull their money out of the bank, and then bail-in won't work. They have to trap people into banks. And the last point to make is that the government's reassurances are fake because they're not guarantees. And we'll put on the screen, Melissa Harrison of Exposing the Black Economy report did this refutation. The government produced a fact sheet of this bill, right? And Melissa, quickly in yellow there, refuted everyone. And the main point is this: all the so-called guarantees are not, the exemptions are not in the bill, they're in the regulations, and those regulations can be easily changed, whereas the bill can't.
Yep,
right?
that's right.
So Make your submission, rewind this if you have to, follow those tips and put it in straight away. We'll take a break. Welcome back to the CEC report. Finally, how safe are Australia's banks? Bob Katter's bill will find out. And the banks, Craig, are about to get enraged because last week, Bob Katter, the member for Kennedy, gave notice that on the 25th of November, he's going to introduce a bill into the Parliament directing the Auditor-General to conduct a thorough audit of Australia's banks, the big banks, the major banks, right? This audit, if it happens, will be more effective at cleaning up the banks than anything the Royal Commission did.
Yeah, Robbie, I can't get this image out of my head of cockroaches going under the fridge because look, you don't know that they're there. You don't know what they're doing, right? They're hidden. Well, when they come out at night time, right, they're all over the place. But as soon as you shine a light on them, they scurry back under the fridge. Well, that's what the banks are like. Yeah. They're hiding. They use the Royal Commission as a cover, but we not only intend to shine a light on the cockroaches, but we intend to take the fridge away.
And well, that's right, because the fridge is the big four auditors,
yep.
Right? These four firms are global criminal enterprises, and they cover up crimes all over the world. And one of our concerns for a long time is what is the true state of Australia's banks? There was a lie told in 2008 that Australia's banks sailed through the GFC unaffected. No, they required all kinds of emergency guarantees. They required money from the US Fed TARP bailout, the US Congressional TARP bailout, etc. And it was all kept hush-hush. You know, if people like us, you could easily find it, but the media never reported it, right? Yep. And if that was 10 years ago, right, what's the situation now? Because here's the logic behind what this bill does. And we should say, the CEC, we helped draft this bill, right? This is something we've been pushing, and Bob Katter is someone who has actually an instinctive understanding of banks in this area. And I think because he regards banks like he regards crocodiles.
Or cockroaches.
Or cockroaches. But you know how Bob Katter thinks of crocodiles? Well, he takes the same approach to banks. You don't trust them, right? Yep. But the logic behind it is this. The big four banks in Australia, Craig, enjoy an implicit government guarantee. They get funding from overseas on the people, they get a discount. They get to pay less interest on their borrowing from overseas because their creditors know the Australian government will bail them out. Well, then it's up to the government to know what's in their books. And what's in their books, we suspect when you look at the derivatives and the explosion in derivatives, when you look at their exposure to the bubble, no banks in the world have come close to 65% exposure to one asset class like mortgages. None, right? And this is a bubble, and the bubble is teetering at the moment. All these things can bring these banks down in a heartbeat, absolutely smash them, and the government must know that. So in the bill, there's audit requirements. Look at that. So it's not just saying the Auditor General should audit the banks. It's saying here's what he must look at: the derivatives exposure of the banks, the home loan, and no auditors would normally audit the actual assumptions of the derivatives, right? This is what the Auditor General should do. The home loan portfolios of the banks and marking to market the housing values, etc. You know, what do the banks really look like? The adequacy of provisions for defaults and delinquencies in the banks' loan books. Off-balance sheet liability exposures of the banks, and the internal ratings-based model by which the banks are able to assess their own risk and say, oh, see, this is all, we only need to hold this much capital. When the banks find out about this, if they haven't already, they will be chewing the rug, as we say.
This is a very strong light, Robbie.
Absolutely very strong light. This is part of the battle.
Yep.
This is another part of the battle that we're talking about, right? This is the war of our lives to fix up this economic system. Yep. We need your help in it. And the first thing you can do is make your submission straight away. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Craig. Tune in next week for more.